Design shapes the way you live. I'm Nico, an interior design expert focused on the connection between home and well-being. Using science, design, and professional expertise, I'll help you shape a space that elevates your mindset and enhances your well-being. Let's create space for better living, starting now. Hello, welcome back to Your Home by Design. I'm Nico, and here we talk about interior design as a tool, not just to make your home look good, but to make it feel better to live in. Today's episode is about wallpaper, and specifically how to choose wallpaper without regret. Because most advice online treats wallpaper like it's a quick decor decision. Pick a pretty pattern, order the rolls, and hope for the best. But designers don't choose wallpaper in isolation. They're designing the paint, the textiles, the lighting, the mood all at once. So in this episode, I'm going to show you how to choose wallpaper in two very real scenarios. One, when you're designing a room from scratch, the designer scenario, and two, when you're adding wallpaper into a room you already have, the real life scenario. And here's what you're going to walk away with. You'll understand what a wallpaper repeat actually is and why installers always ask about it. You'll learn the integration rule, the simple formula designers use so wallpaper doesn't feel pasted on. You'll finally understand the designer cringe, why some wallpaper looks off from across the room. And I'll give you a clear wallpaper decision formula that you can use for any space. And we'll finish with designer level tips on scale, material choice, and where to start if you're nervous. So if you've ever thought, I love wallpaper, but I don't trust myself with it, this episode is for you. Okay, so let's start with the one thing that makes wallpaper feel complicated before you even begin. And let's talk about what is a repeat. Because I think people hear the term repeat and assume it's a designer wallpaper term. And it's not just a designery term. A wallpaper repeat is simply the distance it takes for the pattern to start again. Okay, so for the pattern to repeat. So from the start of a motif, the point where the motif begins again, that's one repeat. And the reason installers ask for it is very practical. Wallpaper has seams, and the seams need to disappear. You don't want to see a seam, a break in pattern, or for it to not flow. So the pattern needs to line up across those seams. So now here's the part that people don't often realize, that a tiny dot pattern might only need a tiny shift to match, whereas a bigger pattern like a floral or a botanical, anything with a really clear image, often requires the installer to use more material to match it across the joins, to basically cut off more material so that it matches correctly. So the bigger repeat often equals more waste, more rolls. So you'd have to order more rolls, which would be more cost. So that's the practical side. But here's why I'm telling you this in a design episode, because repeat isn't just about ordering. Repeat is also about how your brain reads the wall. And here's the concept that can change everything. Wallpaper isn't just decoration. It's visual structure. It's something you build around. It's the atmosphere. It's spatial rhythm. It becomes the visual structure of the room. It creates that rhythm. It creates movement. It creates the mood. And designers don't pick wallpaper by asking, do I like it? They pick wallpaper by asking, what role is it playing with the rest of the elements? So as you listen, I want you to keep coming back to this one question. Is your wallpaper meant to anchor the room? Is it meant to be a backdrop? Is it the star of the show? So is it creating drama and leading the way? Or is it quiet texture? And now that we've established wallpaper has a role, it has a role to play in all of the choices. It's not just a pretty choice. we have to talk about the two realities that you're choosing it in, because the rules change depending on whether you're designing from scratch or whether you're dropping that wallpaper into an already complete room, or at least a room where most of the design choices have already been made. So your two realities are basically reality one, designing from scratch, or reality two, it's real life. And if you're designing from scratch, this is where majority of designers live most of the time. They're choosing the wallpaper alongside everything else in the space. Everything else is a consideration, and the wallpaper is one element to that. So they're choosing the paint, the upholstery, the rug, the lighting, some of the architectural details depending on the scope of the project. So they could be redoing the floors, they could be completely changing the layout of the space. And all of this is kind of factored in to the decision-making process. So the wallpaper becomes one voice amongst many, and the designer gets to choose how loud that voice is with everything else. And often, wallpaper is essentially like a piece of art. It can inform everything else. It can be the first thing that's chosen in a scheme that informs all the other choices. Art acts the same in a lot of cases. If I'm working on a project and there is nothing to start with, that makes it challenging because you need to pull from something. And often wallpaper is such a great jumping off point because there's different tones, there's different patterns, there's different movement. The scale is going to tell you what the room might need to be. It dictates style. So if there's a design style that the client gravitates to, all of those things. And then the other reality is real life. So oftentimes people are, they already have a rug, they already have the sofa, they already have art that they love and not replacing everything. So for you, if you're, in the real life scenario where you've already selected most things and you just want to add wallpaper in now, the wallpaper has to negotiate with everything else. And this is where most people get stuck because they think of it as the first decision, when actually it's being added as the last decision. Like I said, with the designer approach, it's helpful to have wallpaper as the starting off point. If you don't, you have more considerations to make. So if you're in the real life scenario, and I think a lot of people are, I want you to steal a designer rule that will save you, okay? So here it is. If you only take one thing from this episode today, take this: the integration rule. If you add wallpaper to a finished room, you need to adjust some things in the space. You can't just have the wallpaper installed, throw it up, walk away, and you can't just think that everything else can stay the same. Things need to be adjusted and considered with the wallpaper, regardless of at what stage it comes in. Okay, so adjust at least 2 to 3 other things, like minimum 2 to 3 other things, so that the room kind of comes together cohesively and it doesn't look like the wallpaper was chosen last and then you run the risk of it not really having a rhythm with everything else. So adjust 2 to 3 things. I'll give you a list of things. Textiles. So adjust some of your textiles. This can be pillows, throws, drapery. And you want to make the adjustment so that it works with the choice of paper. You want to adjust your art, the scale of the actual art itself. Does it work with it? If it's sitting against it, if it's sitting in front of the wallpaper, you need to make sure that the scale is speaking to each other. And then also the frame. What is the tone of the frame? Is it contrasting the paper enough? Another thing to adjust is one lighting element. So a fixture style or even just the brightness, because depending on the wallpaper you choose, if you've chosen a darker paper, if it's, a darker pattern, then the brightness of your light fixtures might not be as effective. So obviously, if it's a darker paper, the room is going to read darker. So you might need to actually adjust a lighting element in order to get more adequate lighting in the space. Even just the style, you might have to adjust the look or the style of a fixture. Lighting fixtures speak to different design styles or different vibes in the room. So you might need to make sure that that's working. Another thing to adjust is your ground color. So where else in the room are you seeing that the colors in the wallpaper? Are you tying it together in the best way? Is there a nod somewhere to that color or those tones across the room, or in your upholstery, or in your rug, or in your accessories? Like, look in the room for color. The next thing is objects that repeat the wallpaper tones. So again, if we're looking at color, how are we bringing that in? Our objects can also repeat the movement of the wallpaper. So if the wallpaper has certain shapes, or even if it has a certain, like if it's whimsical and it's got a playful vibe to it, then you can add some objects that speak to that kind of jive with that, right? Because wallpaper introduces a new rhythm to the space, and the room must echo it somewhere. Otherwise, it just feels like it's that afterthought and there isn't that cohesion. So now you know how to integrate wallpaper so it feels like it belongs more in your room. But now we need to talk about the thing designers feel instantly, but most people can't name, and that's the cringe. So have you ever seen wallpaper and from across the room, it feels almost grid-like? Even if it's, say, like a floral, when you go close up, it looks very different than when you look from further away. And from further away, it almost looks like stacked. The pattern is stacked. Well, that's when your brain starts doing something very specific. It actually starts mapping the grid. So when motifs line up vertically and horizontally, your eye locks in and tracks it. The wall stops reading as one, and it starts reading as like structure, like a printed structure that's repeating. And here's the simplest way to say it. If you can predict that next flower, like it's obvious and you start recognizing it, then the sort of the interest and the excitement of that wallpaper disappears. I do want to give you a simple why, just because once you understand it, I think you'll just be able to make better choices. And I think that it's important to understand what's going on when we look at pattern. So I want to share some of the science behind it. So your brain loves pattern. Our brains just are built for it. We can recognize patterns very, very quickly. But we also love variation. Our brains love when things aren't always predictable. And there's this concept called predictive processing, where your brain is constantly kind of guessing what comes next. When something is too predictable, your attention sharpens, almost like it's looking for. So an obvious repeat can keep your nervous system slightly on, just alert, not in like panic, but just on. And that's why some wallpaper feels sort of subtly irritating over time. And designers tend to prefer patterns where the repeat is actually harder to detect, because it keeps the wall reading as sort of like one continuous pattern, continuous flow, like atmosphere, instead of looking at a printed grid. Okay, so now let's translate that into more design language, because you don't need to know all the details of the science, but I think you need a decision process, which can help when you're choosing things like pattern and when you're challenging yourself creatively. So here's a simple but powerful distinction. Some patterns are objects and some patterns are texture. Okay, so like birds, roses, faces, dogs. The brain recognizes these really quickly, almost instantly. When they repeat in like a rigid way, your brain counts them. But dots and brush strokes and grass cloth is very textural. There isn't pattern in the sense of like objects, and there's more abstract movement. Your brain reads those more like texture, and texture supports immersion. So if you're drawn to representational patterns, you need to be even more careful about the repeat and the layout. So here's a simple but powerful distinction. When we're talking about wallpaper patterns, there are a couple different types of patterns. There's patterns that show objects, and there's patterns that are texture. So dogs and roses and faces and birds and flowers, your brain recognizes these instantly. When they repeat in a rigid way, your brain counts them. But dots, like small dots and little brush strokes or grass cloth or even abstract movements, your brain reads those more like texture. And texture supports immersion. So if you're drawn to more of like the representational patterns, like the objects, you need to be even more careful about the repeat and the layout. Like it's really important because objects are more literal to how we see them. And therefore that repeat and the layout becomes even more important. So now we're going to get very practical. I'm going to give you a formula you can literally run your wallpapers through. Now we're going to get very practical. I'm going to give you a formula that you can literally run your wallpaper choices through. Okay, so step 1 is decide the role. The role of the wallpaper is really important. Is it going to be a backdrop? Is it going to add drama, or is it there for texture, or is it an anchor for other decisions? So decide the role. Step 2 is check the repeat with your eyes. Can you see vertical lines forming? Can you predict what comes next? Does your eye travel or does it stop? Now, this is a choice, and it's based on if you're going with a really small repeat, like a dot, or if it's more of a textural repeat, then, having that continuous feel isn't as important. But if it's a larger pattern, you want that repeat to be varied and you want it to feel organic and not so predictable. Okay, so check that repeat with your eyes. And step 3 is scale versus room size. Here you can play with it. In a small room, it often works really well having bigger scale because there's fewer visual repeats, and it kind of makes the room actually feel bigger at times. But again, it depends on what you want the room to do. If you want the room to feel cozy and enclosed, think about maybe a smaller scale on your walls, or a repeat, like I said, a dot or something like that. But so just look at how that scale impacts your room and everything else that's going on in the room. Step 4 is if the room is already finished, use the integration rule, right? So adjust those 2 to 3 elements so the wallpaper belongs. You can adjust more than that, but a minimum of 2 to 3 elements. And step 5 is stand back like 6 to 8 feet. Never judge wallpaper from really close up, because when you look at something from like 12 inches away or a foot away, it's going to be a lot different. It's going to read a lot different than it is if you step back. It's amazing how a small pattern, when you've got it really close up, you can see the pattern really, really clearly. And the further back you move from that pattern, it disappears. And then if it's 6 to 8 feet, that pattern can actually look like a texture, like the pattern disappears completely. So you don't want that to be a letdown if you install it and then you realize, oh shoot, this pattern that I chose, I love the pattern, is now just reading as texture and I'm not really seeing it. It's going unnoticed. So yeah, stand back and have a look. Okay, and now that you know how to choose the pattern itself, let's talk about the things that people forget, the designer tricks that really can make wallpaper look more high end. Okay, so irregular orientation prevents grid reading. So that repetition that we're seeing. So doing something a little more varied, a little bit more irregular, keeps things interesting, keeps things exciting. Matte finishes feel or can feel more architectural, and slight color variation adds depth. Avoid overly shiny vinyl because that sort of shiny sheen can read almost like plastic. So be careful there. Lighting temperature, so like the color of the light changes undertones dramatically. So if you've got a really warm color temperature or a cool color temperature, these really do change the undertones. So watch for that. And then watch for scale. So objects that you have in the room, decorative objects, they should be either larger or smaller than the pattern in the wallpaper, not the same. And then consider your ceiling heights, because if you have vertical movement in your wallpaper, so you can, it's like a trick of the eye. If you have a low ceiling height and you have vertical movement like a stripe, or even just in a pattern, there's a vertical movement that can elongate the room and make that ceiling height feel higher. And if you want to go bold with like pattern drenching, wrapping walls and ceilings can be incredible. It looks amazing, but you have to do it intentionally. So either keeping the paper quieter so it becomes more texture, or if it's dramatic, simplifying everything else. So you can simplify by repeating tones. So if there's certain tones in the, maybe you want to have some painted furniture pieces that are the same as the tones, or that sort of thing. Yeah, so now I want to speak to the emotional piece, because wallpaper isn't just design, it's commitment. So I think when we're talking about wallpaper, it's really important to acknowledge something honestly. Wallpaper is not paint, right? Paint completes a space, it ties it together, it unifies things, it adds mood, but it's rarely the star, right? Wallpaper can be the star, and that's why it feels different. There's something about physically gluing pattern to your wall that feels permanent. Even if technically you could remove it, it just feels like a commitment. And I think that's why people approach it differently. It's not for the faint of heart, right? Because pattern says something. It leans into a direction. It announces a style. And once it's up, it's up, which is also why people feel safer doing it in a smaller space, like a powder room, right? It's smaller, it's contained. You don't spend hours in there. You don't have 5 fabrics and layered upholstery to coordinate. It's mostly hard surfaces, right? There's tile and mirror and lighting, maybe 1 or 2 pieces of art. So if you're wallpaper curious but hesitant, that is a beautiful place to experiment. Try it in a laundry room, even a mud room, a space where the variables are limited. I think that that's a good place to boost your confidence a little bit. So now I want to share something from when I started out. When I first began pulling wallpaper for projects, I would go into showrooms and I would ask for so many samples, books, loose swatches, entire binders, and I almost felt bad every time I did it. But looking back, that was the process, right? Like designers don't magically just know. I needed to do that for learning and understanding. And I do feel bad to those reps who I'd be like, oh, can I just borrow 10 of these books? But yeah, they don't just magically know. They compare, they lay options side by side, they eliminate, they shift direction, they circle back. Even now, if I haven't specified wallpaper for a while, I need more samples than if I've been immersed in it. Because there's something about exposure. When you're constantly looking at pattern, your eye sharpens. And when you're not, you just need a little bit more input, a little bit more time. And that's totally normal. So if you're feeling like, why is this it's so much harder than I thought? It's because you don't do it every day, right? That doesn't mean you can't make a beautiful decision. It doesn't mean you can't make the right decision for your space. It just means you need to give yourself more comparison material. And this is important. Don't just rely on memory, okay? You want to take photos of everything that's going in the room to see how it's coming together. So if you take photos of things like your existing fabrics, your rug, your art, even the little objects that you love that you want to incorporate, and then print them out, lay them physically on a table. Because being able to move them around, compare scale, compare tone, it changes everything. And you get to see how those relate to the wallpaper that you're thinking about. So when you're standing inside the room, you're too close. Your brain fills in the gaps. It adapts. But when you pull everything out of context and look at it on a table, it's flattened, almost like a collage. You can see the relationships more clearly. You can see if the wallpaper is fighting the rug. You can see if the art disappears. You can see if the color temperature is slightly off. And designers rarely choose from just one option. They usually have several kind of finalists. And they sit with them, they swap them in and out, and they let them breathe. So give yourself that same permission. Order the samples and borrow the books. And don't feel guilty about it. This is not being indecisive. This is just being deliberate and making sure that you're making the right choice. And if you're borrowing the books and you have to return them, take pictures of the samples in the book that you love and print those out. Now, bear in mind that, of course, when you print things, the color does change a little bit. It's not 100% accurate. So you'll want to, when you've narrowed down your options, you'll want to go back and get the books or order the samples just to make sure you have the physical sample on hand. And I also think we have to talk about overthinking, because there's a difference between gathering information and talking yourself out of something. Sometimes deep down, you want the bold pattern. You want the room drenched, but you start asking everyone's opinion too early, right? You could be asking your mom, your sister, your friend who has great taste, and suddenly their sort of tolerances become your decision filter. You start talking yourself out of things that perhaps you would have gone for, instead of narrowing it down first to get 2 or 3 of your faves, then asking for secondary opinions if you need it, right? So, and then asking between the choices, asking like which one feels strongest, not should I do wallpaper? Because that question just invites a lot of opinions. And if they're fearful of wallpaper, they're going to share that with you. And wallpaper is expressive, and it's almost like installing art across your walls. And art is allowed to be directional, right? It's allowed to speak. So before you even start looking at patterns, step back and look at your whole home. What do you gravitate toward? What shapes repeat throughout your house? Are you drawn to curved lines or more architectural structure? Are your spaces warm and layered or crisp and clean? Do you lean traditional, modern, relaxed? You are not starting from nothing. There are always clues in your home, and your job is to find them and use them as a jumping off point. There always has to be a reason that you choose what you choose. And once you determine your direction, you have to trust it. So before you even start looking at patterns, step back and look at your whole home. What do you gravitate toward? What shapes repeat throughout your house? Are you drawn to curved lines or more architectural structure? Are your spaces warm and layered or crisp and clean? Do you lean traditional, modern, or relaxed? You are not just starting from nothing, right? It can feel that way at times, but you're never starting at nothing. There are already clues in your home, and your job is really to find them and use them as a jumping off point. There always has to be a reason you choose what you choose. And once you determine your direction, you have to trust it. I was thinking about this the other day when I was looking through an old antiques book of mine. And I was looking at all the photos, and there were these pictures of grand late 18th century halls with layered pattern and history. Wallpaper has always told stories, like William Morris patterns, historical botanicals, murals. They anchor a space in feeling, but they can anchor it in time. And that's another beautiful way to choose wallpaper. Sometimes the story can be the starting point, right? Well, where was this pattern designed? What era does it reference? What feeling does it evoke? And finally, creativity. Some people think, I'm just not creative, but so much of what feels like creativity in design is actually trained perception. Because interior designers develop pattern recognition over time, or at least they get better at it the more experience and time they are designing. They build rhythm awareness. They build sensitivity to tension. So when they react to a visible repeat or a scale imbalance, it feels intuitive. But it's exposure, it's repetition, it's experience. You can build that. And this choosing wallpaper is part of building that skill. So if it feels slightly uncomfortable, slightly big, that's okay. That's just kind of growth in design. You don't have to be perfect at it. You just have to move through the process properly. Gather, compare, edit, trust, and then just commit. And if all of that still feels big, if you're still thinking, okay, Nico, but where do I actually begin? Let's make this simple for you. Just start small, like a powder room. And I mentioned this already, but you could also start in a laundry room or a mud room, even a laundry closet, right? Because you can get high impact, but lower complexity. Like you don't have to worry about the soft furnishings that you have to coordinate. And please hire a professional installer. Watching an expert wallpaper hanger work is honestly like watching an artist. Measuring and ordering can get so confusing fast, and a professional can just save you from ordering either way too little or way too much, because they work out the calculation and they know what they're doing. So when you're ordering wallpaper, it can be ordered in double rolls. It can be ordered in yards. You have to factor in the repeats and the waste, but it's not even that simple. Like there's so many more things that you can factor in, because it could be single roll, double roll, yard. It can be half drop. It can be by the foot. It depends on the manufacturer. It depends on what country you order it from. So having somebody do this for you and calculate this, it's like another way to save yourself not only a lot of time, but potentially a lot of money. And then just the fact that how you're having somebody who knows what they're doing install it, when you've gone to all of the trouble to pick something, and then you've gone to the trouble to purchase it, and you've actually, you're invested in it stylistically, but as well as financially. Yes, installers aren't the most inexpensive thing, but I do think that you pay for their professionalism, and just having that experience and then getting the reward from seeing it done properly, and that satisfaction from knowing that that the end result is going to be of really good quality, that's definitely something to pay for. And if you want inspiration, look at designer brands like McGee & Co. Look at Philip Jeffries, Chasing Paper, Morris & Co., York wall coverings. I'll share more sources on my Instagram and my Pinterest. Have a post for wallpaper inspiration and where to shop, so you can check that out. So here's what I hope you take from this episode. Wallpaper isn't just something you hang. It's something you live with. It changes how light moves, how your eye travels, how your body settles into your space. And when you understand repeat, scale, and rhythm, you stop reacting to rooms. You start shaping them. That's the shift from copying what looks good online to creating something that feels right in your very own home. So if you've been hovering over samples, unsure, I hope this episode gave you some clarity. Trust your direction, do the process properly, and don't talk yourself out of the bold move if it's been calling you. Because design isn't about perfection, it's about intention. And intention is what transforms a house into something that truly supports you. You can find more design insights and intentional living content on Pinterest at Paro Create Space. That's Paro Create Space. On Instagram at Your Paro. That's YOURPARO. And at bynico.space. That's BYN. Thanks so much for listening today. If you found this episode helpful, the best way to support the show is to follow along and share it with someone who'd love it too. And if you'd like to go a step further, you can become one of our Better Living backers. It's a small monthly contribution that helps keep the show going. And as a thank you, I'll send you a personal note along with a 15% discount for the Create Space course when it launches. You can find the support the show link right in the show notes. I'm so glad you're here. Thanks for creating space with me.